What if the thing holding you back isn't failure, bad luck, or other people, but the quiet voice inside you that hesitates every time you get close to change? Self-doubt doesn't usually scream. It whispers. It sounds reasonable. It tells you to wait, to be careful, to stay where you are just a little longer. And before you realize it, years pass and your life stays the same. The Stoics believed fear doesn't come from events themselves, but from how we interpret them. Most of what you fear isn't happening right now. It exists only in your imagination, rehearsed over and over until it feels real. Fear survives not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Self-doubt thrives on confusion about what you can and cannot control. You worry about being judged, rejected, embarrassed, or failing, but none of those things are fully in your hands. The Stoics were very clear about this. You only control your actions, your effort, and your character. You do not control outcomes, opinions, or timing. When you mix these up, your mind panics. You start trying to manage things you were never meant to manage, and that mental overload turns into hesitation. Self-doubt isn't weakness, it's misdirected energy. Fear often feels like a warning, but most of the time it's just your brain trying to protect your current identity. Change threatens the version of you that people already recognize, even if that version is unhappy. Your mind prefers a known discomfort over an unknown possibility. That's why self-doubt spikes right before growth. The Stoics taught that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're stepping outside habit. Growth always feels unfamiliar before it feels empowering. Another reason self-doubt holds you back is because you've attached your worth to results instead of effort. When success becomes the measure of your value, fear takes control. You stop acting freely and start performing carefully. The Stoics rejected this completely. They believed your worth comes from how you act, not how things turn out. You can do everything right and still fail, and that doesn't mean you were wrong to try. Fear weakens when you stop asking, "Will this work?" and start asking, "Is this aligned with who I want to be?" Self-doubt also grows when you delay action, waiting to feel confident. Confidence is not a prerequisite, it's a byproduct. The Stoics understood that clarity comes from movement, not thinking. Most people wait to feel ready, but readiness is created by doing the thing you're avoiding. Fear tells you to think more. Wisdom tells you to act with what you know right now. Small, imperfect action is how fear loses its grip. You may believe your fear is personal, but it's universal. Everyone who has ever done something meaningful felt uncertainty first. The difference is not courage, it's relationship to fear. The Stoics didn't try to eliminate fear, they learned to walk forward with it. Fear doesn't mean you're incapable, it means you care. When you stop treating fear as an enemy and start treating it as information, it stops controlling you. Self-doubt becomes dangerous when you mistake thoughts for facts. Just because your mind says, "I can't," doesn't make it true. The Stoics trained themselves to question every internal narrative. Ask yourself, is this fear proven, or is it predicted? Most self-doubt is built on imagined futures that never arrive. When you challenge the story, the emotion weakens. Your mind learns that it doesn't get to run unchecked. Fear holds you back most when you let it decide for you. The Stoics believed freedom begins the moment you choose your response. You may not control the fear, but you control whether it leads or follows. Every time you act, despite doubt, you retrain your mind. You teach yourself that fear is not authority. It's just a feeling, and feelings were never meant to run your life. At its core, self-doubt is not a lack of ability, but a lack of trust in yourself. Somewhere along the way, many people learn to outsource confidence, to approval, results, reassurance, or timing. When those things disappear, so does their sense of direction. The Stoics warned against this kind of dependency. They believed that when your inner stability depends on external validation, fear will always have leverage over you. Self-doubt tightens its grip when you stop seeing yourself as the authority over your own life. Fear also grows when your identity becomes too rigid. You start believing you must always be consistent, always certain, always strong. But growth requires contradiction. It requires you to admit you don't know yet. The Stoics accepted uncertainty as part of wisdom. They understood that pretending to be fearless actually makes fear stronger because it gets pushed underground. When you allow yourself to say, "I'm unsure and I'm still moving forward," fear loses its power to paralyze you. Another hidden layer of self-doubt is the fear of responsibility. Success is not just exciting, it's demanding. If you change, your excuses disappear. If you improve, your old habits can't come with you. The mind sometimes creates doubt to avoid the weight of accountability. Staying stuck feels safer than becoming someone who must live up to their potential. The Stoics believed that avoiding responsibility was a greater danger than failure itself, because it slowly erodes self-respect. Self-doubt also feeds on comparison. When you measure your beginning against someone else's middle, your progress feels inadequate. The Stoics rejected comparison entirely. They believed life is not a race against others, but a test of your own character. The moment you stop competing for approval and start competing with yesterday's version of yourself, fear becomes quieter. You realize your path doesn't need to look impressive. It needs to be honest. Many people think fear fades once you gain experience, but often the opposite happens. As your awareness grows, so does your understanding of risk. The Stoics didn't see this as a flaw. They saw it as maturity. The goal was never to eliminate fear, but to prevent it from overruling reason. Courage, in Stoic terms, was acting in alignment with values even when fear remains present. This reframes fear from a stop sign into background noise. Self-doubt intensifies when you live too far in the future. Your mind projects worst-case scenarios and convinces you they are inevitable. The Stoics constantly returned themselves to the present moment because the present is the only place where action is possible. You cannot solve a future that hasn't arrived, but you can take one grounded step right now. Fear shrinks when the task becomes small enough to face. There is also a deeper truth most people avoid. Fear doesn't disappear after you succeed. It simply changes shape. If you wait for fear to vanish before acting, you will wait forever. The Stoics knew that inner freedom comes from accepting this reality. When you stop expecting confidence to be permanent, you stop being disappointed by doubt. You move anyway. Self-doubt holds power only when it remains unquestioned. The moment you observe it instead of obeying it, you regain choice. The Stoics practiced this daily, watching thoughts arise without automatically believing them. This small gap between thought and action is where strength is built. Not in confidence, not in certainty, but in deliberate choice. At some point, self-doubt stops being about fear and starts being about habit. The brain learns hesitation the same way it learns confidence, through repetition. Every time you delay a difficult conversation, avoid a risk, or silence an idea, you reinforce the pattern. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology. They believed character is built through repeated choices, not intentions. Fear becomes strong when avoidance becomes routine. Confidence grows when action, even uncomfortable action, becomes familiar. There is a quiet danger in being reasonable all the time. Self-doubt often disguises itself as logic. It tells you now isn't the right time. You need more information, or you should wait until you're more prepared. The Stoics warned against this trap. They believed wisdom is not endless analysis, but the ability to act with clarity despite incomplete information. Most life decisions do not come with certainty, only direction. When you confuse caution with wisdom, fear gets to wear the mask of intelligence. Another layer of self-doubt comes from emotional memory. Past failures, rejection, or embarrassment leave impressions that the mind tries to protect you from repeating. But protection can become prison. The Stoics believed the past should inform you, not define you. Just because something hurt before doesn't mean it will again. When you let old pain decide new actions, you live backward instead of forward. Growth requires updating your beliefs, not reliving your wounds. Self-doubt also increases when your inner world becomes too loud. Constant input, opinions, advice, comparison, noise drowns out your own judgment. The Stoics valued stillness for this reason, not because silence is peaceful, but because clarity needs space. When you slow down enough to hear your own reasoning, fear loses its grip. You stop reacting and start choosing. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What happens if I don't try?" The Stoics framed regret as a heavier burden than fear. Failure passes. Regret lingers. When you see inaction as a choice, with consequences, self-doubt loses its moral authority. Fear no longer feels like safety. It feels like stagnation. At the deepest level, self-doubt is not about inability. It's about identity. You hesitate because acting would require you to see yourself differently. Growth threatens the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what's possible for you. The Stoics believed identity is not something you discover, but something you practice. Every brave act, no matter how small, reshapes who you are becoming. If this is resonating with you, if you felt this hesitation, this quiet inner resistance, take a moment right now to support this channel. Like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear this, and subscribe to PsychoVest so you don't miss the next step in this conversation. Self-doubt doesn't disappear overnight, but every time you act in alignment with reason instead of fear, you weaken its hold. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. And steady change is the kind that lasts. One of the most overlooked reasons self-doubt persists is because people confuse emotional discomfort with danger. Fear creates physical sensations, tightness in the chest, racing thoughts, hesitation, and the mind interprets those sensations as signals to stop. The Stoics trained themselves to separate sensation from meaning. Feeling afraid does not mean you are unsafe. It means your nervous system is reacting to uncertainty. When you stop obeying sensations as if they are instructions, fear loses its authority over your decisions. Self-doubt also strengthens when your goals are too tied to identity instead of values. When success becomes proof that you are worthy, every step feels risky. The Stoics placed value not on achievement, but on virtue, how you show up, how you act, how you respond under pressure. When your focus shifts from "what will this say about me" to "is this the right action?" fear becomes less personal. You stop protecting your ego and start honoring your principles. There is a quiet illusion that confident people do not struggle internally. In reality, they have simply learned not to negotiate with fear. The Stoics believed that inner dialogue should be disciplined, not indulged. You do not need to silence every fearful thought. You just need to refuse to debate it. The more you argue with doubt, the more attention it receives. When you act without consulting it, it weakens. Another deeper layer is that self-doubt often comes from a fractured relationship with failure. Many people see failure as proof of inadequacy rather than evidence of effort. The Stoics reframed failure as training. Every misstep reveals something that comfort never could. When you adopt this perspective, fear loses its sting because failure is no longer an endpoint. It's feedback, and feedback is useful, not threatening. Self-doubt also feeds on impatience. People underestimate how long internal change takes, so they assume something is wrong when progress feels slow. The Stoics emphasized endurance. They believed strength is built gradually through repeated exposure to discomfort. When you expect immediate confidence, doubt feels discouraging. When you expect gradual adaptation, doubt feels normal. There is also the fear of outgrowing people. Growth creates distance. When you change, relationships shift, dynamics adjust, and not everyone comes with you. The mind senses this loss and uses doubt as a brake. The Stoics accepted this as part of life's natural order. They believed clinging to approval was a form of self-betrayal. Fear quiets when you stop requiring permission to evolve. Self-doubt becomes most powerful when you mistake it for intuition. Intuition is calm, fear is urgent. The Stoics taught that wisdom speaks quietly and steadily, while fear rushes and pressures. Learning to tell the difference changes everything. When you slow down and act from reason instead of urgency, your choices become clearer, and doubt fades into the background. Ultimately, fear only controls what you delay. The longer a decision remains unmade, the more power doubt gains. The Stoics believed action was the antidote to rumination, not reckless action, but deliberate, values-based movement. Even the smallest step forward reduces fear's influence because it breaks the cycle of avoidance. Self-doubt often survives because it gives the illusion of humility. It sounds modest, cautious, even self-aware. But the Stoics warned that constantly questioning your worth is not humility. It's self-absorption turned inward. When all your energy goes into monitoring whether you are good enough, you lose sight of what actually matters, acting well. Fear weakens when attention shifts from the self to the action itself. Another layer most people miss is how self-doubt is reinforced by over-identifying with thoughts. A thought appears, I might fail, I'm not ready, I'll look foolish, and the mind treats it like a command. The Stoics practiced mental distance. They saw thoughts as events, not truths. When you observe a thought without merging with it, you create space. And in that space, choice returns. Self-doubt also grows when your standards are unrealistic. You expect clarity before starting, confidence before acting, and certainty before committing. The Stoics rejected perfectionism. They believed excellence comes from consistent effort, not flawless execution. When you allow yourself to be a beginner, awkward, uncertain, imperfect, fear loses its grip. You stop demanding proof of success before participation. There is a hidden grief underneath fear, the grief of letting go of who you thought you would be by now. Self-doubt becomes a way to avoid facing that disappointment. The Stoics believed acceptance was strength, not surrender. Accepting your current position allows movement forward. Resisting reality keeps you stuck, replaying an old timeline that no longer exists. Fear also intensifies when your life lacks structure. When days blur together, the mind fills the void with doubt. The Stoics lived by routines because routine reduces mental chaos. Clear priorities, quiet fear. When you know what matters today, doubt has less room to roam. Action anchored in purpose steadies the mind. Another reason fear lingers is because people confuse safety with stagnation. Comfort feels protective, but over time, it erodes confidence. The Stoics believed voluntary discomfort was essential, choosing difficulty on purpose so fear doesn't surprise you later. When you regularly do hard things by choice, fear stops feeling like an emergency. Self-doubt also thrives when you keep postponing decisions to protect optionality. Keeping doors open feels smart, but it drains energy. The Stoics believed commitment creates freedom, not limitation. When you choose a direction, fear has fewer angles to attack from. Indecision is where doubt multiplies. At a deeper level, fear remains when you're living out of alignment with your values. When actions and beliefs don't match, the mind creates tension. Self-doubt fills that gap. The Stoics taught that peace comes from integrity, doing what you believe is right, even when it's uncomfortable. When you act in alignment, fear doesn't vanish, but it stops arguing with you. Every time you choose reason over avoidance, something subtle changes. You begin to trust yourself, not because you feel fearless, but because you've proven you can move forward anyway. And that trust, once built, becomes quieter than confidence, but far more durable. Self-doubt often lingers because people expect inner alignment to feel dramatic. They think clarity arrives as a surge of confidence or a sudden sense of certainty. But the Stoics understood that alignment is usually quiet. It feels like calm resolve, not excitement. When people don't feel a rush, they assume they're doing something wrong and retreat. Fear feeds on this misunderstanding. It convinces you that if it doesn't feel powerful, it isn't right. In reality, the most grounded decisions often feel almost ordinary. Another reason fear persists is because people underestimate how much of their doubt is borrowed, opinions absorbed from family, culture, past authority figures, or early experiences become internal rules. The Stoics believed freedom begins when you examine which beliefs are truly yours. When you question inherited limitations, fear weakens. You realize many of the rules shaping your life were never consciously chosen. Self-doubt also intensifies when effort goes unseen. When progress isn't immediately rewarded, the mind assumes it isn't working. The Stoics practiced acting without needing applause. They believed the truest form of strength is doing the right thing, even when no one notices. When your motivation becomes internal, fear loses leverage. You stop needing reassurance to continue. There is also a deep fear of stillness. Many people keep themselves busy to avoid hearing their own doubts clearly, but distraction doesn't remove fear, it delays it. The Stoics intentionally sat with discomfort so it would lose its shock value. When you stop running from doubt and allow it to exist without reacting, it becomes less intimidating. Familiarity reduces fear. Self-doubt grows when you confuse caution with self-protection. True protection comes from competence, not avoidance. The Stoics emphasized skill building over safety seeking. When you improve your ability to handle challenges, fear naturally declines. Confidence grows from capability, not reassurance. Fear also holds power when you believe you must solve everything at once. The Stoics approached life incrementally. One decision, one action, one day. When you break life into manageable pieces, doubt has less room to overwhelm you. The mind relaxes when the path feels navigable. Another hidden layer is resentment toward effort itself. When you feel life should have been easier by now, effort feels unfair. Self-doubt becomes an excuse to disengage. The Stoics believed effort was not punishment, it was the price of meaning. When you accept effort as part of a meaningful life, fear no longer feels like a warning sign. It feels like confirmation you're doing something worthwhile. At the deepest level, fear persists when you don't yet trust your ability to recover. You worry that if things go wrong, you won't be able to handle it. The Stoics placed immense faith in human resilience. They trained themselves to face loss, discomfort, and uncertainty mentally before it arrived, not to become pessimistic, but to become prepared. When you trust your ability to adapt, fear loosens its grip. Each time you act despite doubt, you gather quiet evidence, not that everything will work out, but that you can meet whatever comes next. And that realization changes how fear speaks to you. It becomes less commanding, less urgent, more distant. Self-doubt becomes heavier when you mistake emotional fatigue for truth. When you're tired, overwhelmed, or drained, your thoughts turn darker and more limiting. The Stoics were careful not to trust the mind in states of exhaustion. They believed wisdom requires energy. Many fears are not revelations. They are symptoms of depletion. When you rest, simplify, and regain clarity, doubt often loses its intensity. Fear shrinks when the body and mind are no longer overloaded. Another quiet trap is waiting for motivation. Self-doubt thrives in that waiting space. The Stoics believed discipline should lead motivation, not the other way around. Action creates momentum, and momentum creates belief. When you stop asking yourself whether you feel like moving forward and start asking whether moving forward is the right thing to do, fear stops negotiating with you. Self-doubt also deepens when you avoid naming what you actually want. Vagueness feels safer than commitment. The Stoics valued precision in thought because clarity demands responsibility. When you clearly define your aim, fear has fewer places to hide. Indecision feeds doubt. Intention starves it. There is also the fear of being seen trying, not succeeding, trying. Many people avoid effort because effort exposes desire, and desire exposes vulnerability. The Stoics accepted vulnerability as the cost of sincerity. When you stop pretending you don't care, fear loses its leverage. You no longer need to protect an image of indifference. Fear strengthens when you confuse patience with passivity. The Stoics were patient, but never idle. They acted steadily while accepting that results take time. When patience becomes an excuse to delay necessary action, self-doubt grows. True patience includes movement. Another deep layer is the fear of consistency. Showing up once is easy. Showing up repeatedly forces identity change. The Stoics believed character is revealed in repetition. Fear appears when you realize this isn't a one-time decision. It's a way of living. But once you accept that truth, the pressure lifts. You stop searching for a single brave moment and start building quiet courage daily. If this perspective is helping you see fear differently, pause for a moment and support this channel. Like the video, share it with someone who may be wrestling with self-doubt, and subscribe to PsychoVest so you can continue this journey of clarity, strength, and grounded growth. Self-doubt weakens not through force, but through consistency. Every aligned action is a vote for the person you are becoming. Fear notices this, and over time, it stops trying to stop you. In relationships, self-doubt often shows up as silence. You hesitate to speak honestly, to set boundaries, or to ask for what you need because you fear conflict or abandonment. The Stoics believed that avoiding truth weakens relationships more than discomfort ever could. When you betray your own needs to keep peace, fear quietly takes control. Over time, this creates resentment, not harmony. Courage in relationships isn't loud, it's clear. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, builds respect. Fear also causes people to overgive in love. You try to earn security by being indispensable. But the Stoics warned against tying your worth to how needed you are. Love built on fear of loss becomes exhausting. When you act from self-respect instead of insecurity, fear loses its grip. You stop chasing stability and start embodying it. With money, self-doubt often disguises itself as avoidance. You avoid looking at numbers, making decisions, or planning long-term because it feels overwhelming. The Stoics believed neglect creates more anxiety than responsibility. When you face what you've been avoiding, fear shrinks, not because everything improves instantly, but because uncertainty turns into information, and information restores power. Fear around money is rarely just about finances. It's about self-trust. It's the fear that if you make the wrong move, you won't recover. The Stoics trained themselves to trust their adaptability more than their predictions. They believed wealth could be lost, but character and reason could not. When you anchor security in your ability to respond rather than in perfect planning, financial fear loosens its hold. In purpose, self-doubt becomes existential. You wonder if you're too late, if you missed your path, or if you're meant for more but don't know how to access it. The Stoics rejected the idea of a single destined path. They believed purpose is revealed through action, not discovery. You don't find purpose by thinking, you build it by contributing. Fear quiets when you focus on usefulness instead of identity. Many people delay meaningful work because they fear choosing the wrong path. The Stoics saw this as a misunderstanding. There is no perfect path, only committed effort. Direction becomes right through dedication. Fear loses power once you stop waiting for certainty and start creating alignment through daily action. Self-doubt also shows up as impatience with purpose. You expect clarity quickly, and when it doesn't come, you assume you're failing. The Stoics believed a meaningful life unfolds slowly. Impatience creates doubt. Endurance builds confidence. When you accept that purpose evolves, fear stops pressuring you to have all the answers now. Across love, money, and purpose, fear uses the same strategy. Delay. Delay the conversation, delay the decision, delay the step forward. The Stoics believed delay is where fear does its most damage, not in action, but in hesitation. When you move, even imperfectly, you reclaim agency. The more areas of life you confront directly, the more unified you become internally. Self-doubt thrives on fragmentation. Integrity weakens it. When your actions match your values across different parts of life, fear has fewer contradictions to exploit. Self-doubt often tightens its grip during transitions. Any moment where the old version of you no longer fits, but the new version isn't fully formed yet, creates psychological tension. The Stoics recognized this as a natural state, not a failure. They understood that discomfort during transition is evidence of growth, not instability. When you expect this phase instead of resisting it, fear loses much of its urgency. Another hidden layer is how self-doubt feeds on self-betrayal. Each time you ignore your own standards, small promises broken, values compromised, your confidence erodes quietly. The Stoics believed self-trust is built through integrity in minor actions. Fear grows when you don't trust yourself to follow through. When you keep even small commitments, fear has less ground to stand on. Self-doubt also intensifies when you replay the same mental arguments without resolution. The mind circles familiar worries because they feel safer than unknown outcomes. The Stoics practiced decisiveness, not because they were always right, but because unresolved tension drains clarity. Choosing ends rumination. Fear weakens once movement begins. There is also the fear of being misunderstood. Many people hold back because they assume clarity will protect them from misinterpretation. The Stoics accepted that misunderstanding is unavoidable. You can act with honesty and still be judged unfairly. When you stop trying to manage perceptions, fear loses one of its strongest tools. Self-doubt often appears when you are about to outgrow your environment. When your thinking expands but your surroundings remain the same, inner friction builds. The Stoics believed environment shapes thought, and thought shapes behavior. Sometimes fear is simply the signal that your current context can no longer support who you are becoming. Recognizing this reduces self-blame and restores direction. Fear also gains strength when progress lacks meaning. When actions feel disconnected from values, motivation fades and doubt increases. The Stoics believed meaning stabilizes effort. When you clearly understand why something matters, fear becomes secondary. Purpose doesn't eliminate doubt, but it gives you a reason to move anyway. Another subtle layer is the fear of consistency being boring. Some people sabotage momentum because struggle feels familiar. Calm progress feels unnatural. The Stoics warned against confusing drama with depth. True strength is often quiet, repetitive, and unglamorous. When you accept that growth can feel simple, fear stops demanding chaos as proof of effort. Self-doubt also feeds on unexpressed anger, anger at past versions of yourself, at others, or at circumstances. Suppressed emotion turns inward as doubt. The Stoics believed emotion should be examined, not denied. When you face resentment honestly, fear often dissolves with it. The more you confront fear directly, the less personal it feels. You begin to see it not as a flaw, but as a predictable response to responsibility. And when fear becomes predictable, it becomes manageable. Self-doubt often remains because people underestimate how deeply the mind is conditioned by repetition. Thoughts you've rehearsed for years don't disappear just because you intellectually understand them. The Stoics knew this and never expected instant inner change. They treated the mind like a muscle that had been trained incorrectly over time. Fear isn't stubborn, it's trained. When self-doubt shows up again and again, it's not proof you're failing. It's proof that your mind is running an old program. The mistake most people make is turning this repetition into self-criticism. They think, why am I still like this, instead of recognizing that undoing years of conditioning requires patience. The moment you stop judging the presence of fear and simply respond to it with reason, its grip begins to loosen. Not dramatically, but reliably. Another reason self-doubt persists is because people expect inner alignment to remove friction from life. In reality, alignment often increases friction at first. When you begin acting in line with your values, you stop numbing yourself with distractions, people-pleasing, or avoidance. That clarity brings resistance to the surface. The Stoics anticipated this. They believed resistance was not an obstacle, but a training ground. When fear surfaces during alignment, it's often because you are no longer betraying yourself. That internal honesty creates tension before it creates peace. If you mistake this tension for a sign you're on the wrong path, you retreat just before strength develops. Self-doubt also survives because many people live too abstractly. They think in vague hopes, fears, and identities instead of concrete actions. The Stoics grounded their philosophy in behavior. They believed the mind stabilizes when life becomes practical. Fear thrives in abstraction because it can't be tested there. When you bring doubt into the real world, through small actions, conversations, decisions, it either weakens or reveals itself as exaggerated. Reality often shrinks what imagination inflates. This is why action feels clarifying even when it's uncomfortable. It forces fear to confront facts instead of fantasies. Another deep layer is the fear of losing control over how your life is perceived. Many people hesitate not because they doubt themselves, but because they fear narrative collapse. They worry that if they try and struggle, the story others believe about them will change. The Stoics believed reputation was outside your control and therefore not worth sacrificing your character for. When you stop managing narratives and start managing conduct, fear loses a powerful leverage point. You realize that living honestly is lighter than living convincingly. Self-doubt also grows when you equate difficulty with personal inadequacy. If something feels hard, you assume you're not suited for it. The Stoics rejected this interpretation entirely. Difficulty was expected, resistance was normal, effort was honorable. When you stop taking difficulty personally, fear stops sounding like a verdict and starts sounding like a challenge. This shift alone changes how you experience struggle. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" There is also a quiet fear of emotional exposure that keeps self-doubt alive. When you act decisively, you risk disappointment, embarrassment, or grief. Hesitation feels emotionally safer because it delays these experiences. The Stoics did not avoid emotion. They prepared for it. They believed strength came from knowing you could endure discomfort without collapsing. When you trust your ability to process pain instead of avoiding it, fear loses its final defense. Self-doubt remains powerful when your inner voice is allowed to speak without accountability. The Stoics treated inner dialogue like a courtroom, not a confession booth. Claims had to be examined, evidence mattered, predictions had to be questioned. When you stop accepting thoughts at face value and start interrogating them calmly, fear begins to sound repetitive and unconvincing. Its arguments weaken under reason. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop needing fear to disappear in order to move. You stop waiting for clarity to feel complete. You stop demanding emotional permission to act. Instead, you develop quiet trust in your ability to respond wisely, even imperfectly. And that trust, once formed, reshapes how fear shows up. It becomes less personal, less dramatic, less convincing. Fear never disappears completely, and it was never supposed to. The Stoics understood that fear is part of being human, not a flaw to erase. What changes is your relationship with it. When you stop treating fear as an enemy and start treating it as a signal, it loses its power to control you. Self-doubt fades, not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. You learn that you don't need certainty to move forward. You don't need confidence to take action. You only need the willingness to act according to reason instead of impulse. The truth is, most people don't fail because they aren't capable. They fail because they never fully confront the voice that tells them to stay small. Self-doubt thrives in avoidance, delay, and distraction, but it weakens every time you choose clarity over comfort. When your actions align with your values, fear becomes quieter, not gone, but manageable. And in that space, something stronger than confidence takes root: self-respect. A disciplined mind does not wait for perfect conditions. It acts where it stands, with what it has, guided by principle rather than fear. This is where real freedom begins, not in the absence of doubt, but in the refusal to let doubt decide your life. When you understand this, fear no longer feels like a barrier. It feels like a test you were always meant to pass. If this message helped bring clarity or perspective, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, share it with someone who may be struggling with self-doubt, and subscribe to PsychoVest for more grounded, stoic insight on building strength, clarity, and inner stability, one deliberate step at a time.